The slight drizzle that we're seeing outside and day going into night has not deterred many voters out here in Grand Rapids. Now, this is the look inside Precinct 3 over at Brookside Elementary School. Officials tell me that they had 516 people come by this precinct by 5:30. Now, the flow here is pretty steady, with voters telling me that they have waited around 10 minutes or a little bit longer than that, but nothing to a large extent.
Today was a little faster than normal. Usually it's a little more crowded and a few more people, but I guess because of the early voting, that kind of killed a lot of that, but it wasn't bad at all.
Now, this is something that I've been seeing at other precincts in different areas that I visited today. You know, starting the afternoon in Grand Rapids Township, we saw officials there tell me 493 voters came by to cast their ballot by 4 o'clock. And the clerk for East Grand Rapids over at Precinct 1 told me that they had more than 400 voters go by there by 5 o'clock today. And we'll keep an eye on voter turnout throughout the night here in Kent County. In Grand Rapids, Josh Sanchez, News 8.
Josh, thank you. Some of those Kent County voters are deciding on who will be the next mayor of Grand Rapids, with Mayor Rosalind Bliss reaching the term limit for that role.
News 8's Kyle Mitchell in studio with what we're learning about each candidate vying for that seat.
Brian and Sue, David LeGrand and Sunita Lanier are the two choices on the ballot. Both bring years of experience as leaders in the city. LeGrand has been a state representative, assistant prosecutor, and served on the GRPS school board. Now, he told News 8 his priorities include justice and public safety, economic development and jobs, affordable housing, holding elected officials accountable, and improving the city's environmental sustainability. Sunita Lanier was a Third Ward commissioner from 2014 to 2022. She told News 8 her priorities include making sure the city has a culture that embraces every resident, supporting economic opportunities for people of color, and addressing parking and congestion downtown. We'll bring you updates on the results after the polls close at 8. Sue.
Okay. Thanks, Kyle. Now let's head over to News 8's Byron Tollefson, who's live outside Lifestream Church, a popular polling location in Allendale. Byron, what kind of turnout are you seeing?
Sue, especially in the last hour or two, as people have gone in out of work, we have seen people flood through these doors to this location in Allendale. Take a look at the line behind me going all the way down there. A lot of people coming through these doors, and that is consistent with what election officials have been seeing. Steady turnout throughout the day across Ottawa County. County Clerk Justin Roebuck expects somewhere between 70,000 and 75,000 voters to vote in person today. That is typical for each presidential election. But more people are actually voting early. The county saw more than 33,000 people take advantage of early in-person voting, while over 71,000 people submitted absentee ballots. And more people turning to early voting is taking the pressure off in-person sites today, keeping voters coming in and out pretty quickly.
We're certainly seeing precincts busy. We had some lines initially at the start of the day, which is typical, you know, as people are headed off to work and to start their day in the voting booth. That does happen, but I feel like we were able to kind of get through those lines within an hour or so, and so far it's really just been a steady turnout throughout the county.
You might remember during the August primary in Ottawa County, the results page tracking all of that had crashed during that race, but the county says they have made adjustments to that and it likely will not happen again. We'll keep you updated on turnout here in Ottawa County throughout the night. For now, live in Allendale, Byron Tollefson, News 8.
Okay, Byron, thank you. Well, the big race that everyone's voting on, who will become our 47th president?
Let's head over to political reporter Rick Alvin. Rick.
And I can assure you I have no idea at this moment. This is the tightest race that I've ever seen in decades of covering it, and it's going to be a while before we know. So patience will indeed be a virtue. If we take a look at our 270 map, you get a bit of a sense of what it is that we will be watching as the results start coming in. Some of the states that will be key: Pennsylvania, obviously the biggest, with 19 electoral votes out there. Understanding that both former President Trump and Vice President Harris have to win at least one of those three states, and in the case of Harris, probably two: Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Now, those three, known as the blue wall sometimes, have over time have favored Democratic candidates, but they are very tight, all up for grabs, as you see. by them not having any color in them. Of course, Georgia and North Carolina, 2 more. Just today, Arizona went from being a toss-up to leans towards Republicans. And that's a quick cautionary note. Just because all of these states are filled in, and most of them have been for weeks, doesn't mean there couldn't be a surprise out there somewhere. There was an outlier poll over the weekend that indicated that Iowa might somehow be in play. We don't know that there's any indication of that, but always understand that these states are not locked into place. 2 other things we know will be different for this race, and this is the first time we will see it with such numbers. We'll start getting some vote dumps right around ballot closing time from all that early voting and all those absentee ballots that have been processed, and that may give us some false indications of exactly the total vote, because we won't know where those votes came from necessarily or who was making them. So there are some variables tonight that we'll have to keep an eye on. Most of all, we'll just have to remember this is not going to be over quickly. Sue?
Okay.
Definitely.
We'll keep that in mind, Rick. Thank you. One of the key races on the ballot is the battle for the U.S. Senate seat that's up for grabs in Michigan.
Joining us from Detroit tonight, News 8's Adriana Doria, where the Democratic camp will be tonight. This has been a heavily watched race with a lot of key topics and issues important to each of them.
Just a few hours away from the polls closing, and we're here in Detroit ahead of Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin's watch party. And Detroit is really acting as the main hub here for Democrats, as Harris Wall surrogates are expected to be here as well, and we're looking at an action-packed evening. Our recent Emerson College polling showing this to be a razor-thin race between Slotkin and her opponent, former Congressman Mike Rogers. So ultimately, battleground Michigan is going to be a close call for both the Senate and the presidency. Slotkin campaigning heavily on being a bipartisan lawmaker, having previously worked for Republican and Democrat presidents during her time in the House and from being in the CIA. Slotkin is vying to fill outgoing U.S. Senator Debbie Stabenow's seat, which she's held now for over 2 decades. In a Wood TV debate last month, Slotkin and Rogers sparred on topics like women's rights, electric vehicles, the economy, Social Security, and immigration. Another big issue for Slotkin is enhancing the middle class and bringing down costs for Michigan workers. This race will ultimately be one that will determine the balance of power in Washington, so the stakes are very high tonight. In Detroit, I'm Adriana Doria, News 8.
And Alyssa Slotkin's opponent, Mike Rogers, and the Michigan GOP are holding their own election night party in Novi.
That's where News 8's Megan Bunchman is tonight. Megan?
Good evening, Brian and Sue. We are live at the Suburban Showplace in Novi right now, where supporters have yet to be let in, but we're starting to see some setup behind us with some Trump van signs and, of course, the U.S. Senate race. Mike Rogers, his seat specifically, as he holds his victory party. That's what they're hoping tonight here. Also, the Michigan GOP holding its own watch party tonight at the same location. Now, Rogers is vying for that open Senate seat after U.S. Senator Debbie Stabenow announced her retirement earlier this year. She held that seat for 24 years. Now, Rogers is a former congressman, and he once sat and was the chair of the House of Committee of Intelligence, so he is not new to or not a stranger to the political world. He is vying for that seat, and if he does successfully get this U.S. Senate seat, it will be the first time in 30 years that a Republican has held the seat. This would also potentially help flip the power control specifically over in D.C. for the U.S. Senate, with right now Democrats, holding a slim majority. But again, with 10 specific Senate seats up for a flip tonight across the nation, this is one of those key races that a lot of people will be keeping an eye on. Of course, also, Michigan GOP will be holding its own watch party here tonight, and we know that the polls do close in about 2.5 hours for most of Michigan. Once the polls do officially close, we expect to start seeing some of those votes be counted, and we can keep you updated on those latest numbers. We just want to make sure that we tell you what's going on right now, kind of quiet as we start the night. But again, it will be much busier as the night goes on, and we do expect to hear from Mike Rogers himself sometime tonight. For now, I'm Megan Bunchman, live in Novi. Back to you.
All right, Megan, thank you. Michigan's 3rd congressional district seat also up for grabs. Incumbent Democrat Hillary Scolton is up against East Grand Rapids attorney Paul Hudson.
News 8's Brittany Flowers joining us now. What can you tell us about this race, Brittany?
Yeah, Sue and Brian, every member of the U.S. House is up for re-election, so the stakes are high when it comes to who will have control of the lower chamber in Washington. Now, here in West Michigan, the battle to keep the 3rd Congressional District seat blue or flip it red comes down to the race between Hillary Scolton and Paul Hudson. Now, Michigan's 3rd Congressional District includes Metro Grand Rapids and much of Kent, Ottawa, and Muskegon counties. Historically, this seat has been held by a Republican, but in 2022, Scolton became the first Democrat to represent the area since the 1970s. She was also the first woman to hold the seat. Now, flipping that to a Democrat was attributed in part to legislative districts that were redrawn in Michigan by the state's Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. Some of Scolton's priorities include attacking price gouging and shrinkflation, lowering the cost of health care, and fixing the immigration system. Hudson says if elected, he would focus on limiting government spending, lowering taxes, securing the border, improving educational outcomes in Michigan, and investing in West Michigan jobs. Now, both candidates will be hosting watch parties tonight in Grand Rapids. We'll have reaction once we learn who the winner of this race is. In studio, Brittany Flowers, News 8.